Most people who encounter Sophia in the Gnostic texts do what I did at first. They file her under mythology. Ancient goddess figure, interesting symbol, move on. That's the version of Sophia you're handed when the topic comes up at all. A poetic metaphor, maybe a feminist reclamation project. Nothing that reaches through the page and does something to you. That's not what happened to me. 30 days ago, I started deliberately working with what the Gnostic tradition calls Sophia's serpent wisdom, the specific current of knowledge attributed to her that the early church went to extraordinary lengths to discredit, bury, and reframe as evil. And I want to tell you exactly what happened, not to convince you of anything supernatural, not to perform spiritual authority I haven't earned, but because something occurred during those 30 days that I cannot explain with the frameworks I walked in with. There was heat, specifically in the chest, recurring, tied to particular practices. And before you close this tab, I know how that sounds. I knew how it would sound when I started. I'm going to walk you through the theology, the suppressed texts, the historical stakes, and then I'm going to describe precisely what I experienced, because precise description is the only honest option I have. This is Gnostic Library. Let's go deep. I'm Daniel, and if you've spent any time with the Nag Hammadi Library, you've probably noticed that Sophia appears everywhere, and that her appearances are never incidental. She is in the Apocryphon of John, the Hypostasis of the Archons, the Gospel of Philip, Pistis Sophia, the Trimorphic Protonoia. She is, depending on which text you're reading, the last emanation of the divine pleroma, the mother of the material world, the being whose desire to know the unknowable Father set the entire cosmic drama into motion. Most people think that makes her a cautionary tale. That's not an accident. That's a frame that was installed. Here's what the texts actually say. In the Apocryphon of John, one of the oldest Gnostic documents we have, likely predating most of the New Testament canon in some form, Sophia is described as acting out of a fullness of wisdom, not foolishness. Her movement, her desire, her reaching beyond the boundaries of the pleroma is characterized not as sin in the way Augustine would later define sin, but as an excess of love, an overflow. The Coptic word used is difficult to translate cleanly, but the closest English rendering is something like yearning that became generative. She didn't fall, she extended. Now here's where it gets cosmically significant. The Archons, the lower rulers who shaped the material world in Gnostic cosmology, did not create humanity independently. According to the hypostasis of the Archons, they looked into the waters and saw a reflection of the divine light above them, and they attempted to create a form in that image. But the form they created was inert. It could not move. It could not speak. It lay on the ground like a shadow of itself. What animated it was Sophia. More specifically, what animates the human being, according to these texts, is the divine pneuma, the breath, the spirit, that Sophia transmitted into matter against the will of the Archons. She tricked them. She breathed what she carried into the vessel they had made, and it became alive with something they could not control. That's not mythology. That's a cosmological claim about what you are at your core. And this is why I personally think this is the most underrated part of the entire Gnostic framework. Not the demiurge, not the archons, not even the divine spark itself, but the specific role of Sophia as the active agent of transmission. She is not a passive symbol. She is the mechanism by which the divine gets inside matter. She is the serpent in the garden not as tempter, but as liberator, offering the gnosis that the demiurge explicitly did not want humanity to have. Irenaeus of Lyon understood this perfectly, which is exactly why he spent so much of his treatise, Adversus Heresies, written around 180 CE, not refuting the theology point by point, but attacking Sophia's character, calling her fall disgraceful, calling her desire disordered. Because if you can make Sophia the villain, you can make the knowledge she carries seem dangerous rather than liberating. One viewer left a comment on my earlier video about the demiurge that stopped me mid-scroll. They wrote, "The moment I understood Sophia wasn't the problem, but the solution, something I'd been carrying for years just released." I read that 3 times, because that's not a casual spiritual insight. That's someone describing a structural shift in how they understand causality and identity. That's exactly where I was standing when I decided to run the 30-day experiment. Let me be precise about what I mean when I say Sophia's serpent wisdom, because this phrase gets used loosely, and loosely is exactly wrong here. In the Gnostic framework, specifically as laid out in the hypostasis of the archons and cross-referenced in the Gospel of Philip, the serpent in the Garden of Eden is identified not with the demiurge and not with malevolence, but with Sophia's instructing spirit. The Coptic text of the hypostasis of the archons refers to this figure as the female spiritual principle that entered the serpent, and whose voice carried the specific instruction, "You will not die. You will become like those who know." That phrase, "those who know," is not an accident of translation. It is a direct index to gnosis, to the knowledge that precedes belief, that bypasses doctrine, that lands in the interior of the human being without requiring institutional intermediary. So when I say serpent wisdom, I mean this: the specific tradition within Gnostic practice that orients towards Sophia as the carrier of interior illumination, the direct, unmediated transmission of self-knowledge that the archons structurally cannot intercept because it doesn't move through external channels. Now, here's where I have to slow down and be honest about what I did and what I didn't do during these 30 days. I want to be precise about what this experiment was. I did not invent a ritual. I did not find some buried manuscript with step-by-step instructions. What I did was spend 30 days with a practice constructed from 3 interlocking elements drawn directly from the texts: sustained contemplative reading of Sophia-centered Gnostic passages, specifically rotating through the Pistis Sophia and the trimorphic Protanoia, both discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, combined with a specific form of interior address I'll describe in a moment, and a deliberate redirection of the recognition impulse. That third element is the one that requires explanation. In my video on what the Gnostic Jesus actually taught about the kingdom, which I'd encourage you to watch if you haven't, I covered the recognition impulse, the Gnostic idea that the divine spark inside the human being is not inert but orienting, constantly trying to turn toward its source the way a plant turns toward light. The Serpent wisdom tradition picks this up and makes it active rather than passive. Rather than waiting for the spark to orient, you direct your attention deliberately inward, not to an image, not to a concept, not to a deity at a distance, but to the act of awareness itself. Not what am I aware of, who is aware? I spent the first 7 days with that question alone, just sitting with it after reading each passage. And I'll tell you honestly, for the first 4 days, nothing happened except that I became acutely aware of how uncomfortable sustained interior attention actually is. The mind reaches for objects constantly. It wants something to look at. Directing it toward the looker itself produces a particular kind of resistance that I can only describe as the cognitive equivalent of pushing 2 same-pole magnets together. Day 5 was different. I don't want to over-dramatize this. I am specifically not going to over-dramatize this. But on day 5, during the reading portion, I was working through the section of Pistis Sophia where Sophia cries out from the chaos and is answered. Something happened in the chest. Not metaphorically. There was a warmth, centered, not diffuse. And it coincided exactly with the moment I stopped reading the text as information about Sophia and started reading it as Sophia's own account of what the interior feels like when the divine is present and the archons are pressing in. I'm not claiming supernatural experience for its own sake. I'm telling you what happened. The warmth recurred on 12 of the 30 days, always during the interior address phase, never during passive reading. always when the attention was pointed at the awareness itself rather than at any content of awareness. And I noticed by the third week that it was preceded consistently by a particular quality of stillness, not absence of thought, but a kind of pressure behind thought, as if something were present underneath the mental noise in the same way the ocean is present underneath a wave. Here's the analogy that finally cracked the framework open for me. Imagine the ocean. Now imagine a wave. The wave is real. It has height, force, direction, movement. But the wave is not separate from the ocean. It is the ocean in a temporary configuration. Sophia's serpent wisdom, as I understand it now, is not about acquiring knowledge from outside. It is about recognizing that what you experience as interior awareness is not produced by the brain the way an engine produces exhaust. It is the pleroma expressing itself through a temporary material configuration. The heat in the chest isn't proof of that, but it is the felt sense of the distinction, the moment you stop identifying exclusively with the wave and notice the ocean underneath. Here's the question I kept returning to during those 30 days. If this is simply an interior contemplative practice derived from ancient texts, why did institutions spend 17 centuries trying to erase it? The answer is not subtle once you see it. You can't collect tribute from a person's interior recognition. You can't build a hierarchy around an unmediated transmission. You cannot position a priest, a bishop, a council, a creed as the necessary intermediary between a human being and an experience that happens entirely inside the human being. Can't exactly put a collection plate in front of someone's awakening to their own divine nature, just saying. This is why the serpent in Genesis had to be made evil. Not because the demiurgic framework needed philosophical coherence, it didn't, and it doesn't, but because the alternative reading, the Gnostic reading, the Sophianic reading, makes the entire apparatus of external religious authority structurally unnecessary. If Sophia breathed the divine pneuma into you at the moment of your formation, and that pneuma is still present, still oriented, still reachable through the specific quality of interior attention I've been describing, then you don't need anyone to give it to you. You already have it. The practice is only about remembering what you never actually lost. Valentinus, one of the most sophisticated Gnostic theologians of the 2nd century, came within a single vote of becoming Bishop of Rome. One vote. Consider what that means for a moment. The tradition he carried, which held that gnosis was accessible directly, without ecclesiastical gatekeeping, nearly became the dominant form of Christianity in the West. The vote went the other way, and within 2 generations, Valentinian communities were being disbanded, their texts destroyed, their teachers accused of sexual immorality and fraud, the standard playbook, then as now. The Nag Hammadi discovery in 1945 didn't just give scholars new texts to analyze. It gave anyone paying attention a way to read the pattern of suppression backward. Because when you look at which texts were preserved by institutional Christianity and which were buried in a sealed jar in the Egyptian desert by someone who clearly feared what would happen if they were found, you get a very clear picture of what the institution considered dangerous. Sophia-centered texts were disproportionately represented in that jar. I spent 3 weeks before starting this experiment just mapping which texts in the Nag Hammadi codices center Sophia as an active agent rather than a cautionary symbol. The ratio was striking. The texts that survive in the canonical tradition, the letters, the Gospels, largely domesticate her. The texts that were buried give her the entire cosmological narrative. She is the one who moves. She is the one who transmits. She is the one who, in the trimorphic protonoia, speaks in the first person across 3 distinct modes of divine presence, as voice, as speech, as word, and says explicitly, I am the one who speaks in every creature. I am the movement. I am the gnosis. That is not a figure the archons want you to internalize, because once you do, the entire logic of external authority over your interior life begins to dissolve. What changed after 30 days? I want to answer that carefully, because the dishonest answer would be to claim transformation that I can't verify. The honest answer is this: the relationship between my thinking mind and whatever is underneath my thinking mind shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way I can display, but in the same way that a room changes when you open a window that's been painted shut for years. The room looks the same, but something is moving through it that wasn't moving before. The heat in the chest was real. I don't know exactly what it was. I know it was tied to a specific quality of attention. I know it recurred under repeatable conditions. I know it felt like recognition rather than sensation, like the difference between seeing a color and suddenly learning the name of a color you've been seeing your whole life. Sophia doesn't ask you to believe anything. That's what the serpent actually offered. Not faith, not doctrine, not obedience. Knowledge. Direct, interior, unmediated. The kind that no institution can grant and no institution can take away. Stop waiting for permission to recognize what's already inside you. Stop treating the divine as a destination rather than an origin. The pneuma Sophia, breathed into matter at the beginning of this cosmic story, is still moving. You don't have to go looking for it. You just have to stop covering it with noise long enough to feel it. If this video resonated with you, let me know by commenting, "I understood."